In this lesson, we will talk about a more advanced effect than what we've been using so far. It's an effect that's going to allow us to create a number counting animation. Okay, there is another place that also has a drop-down for text, and it has a few more advanced options as far as an effect goes. So let's go ahead and bring back up our effects and presets. And so remember, we looked at this text drop down right there, but there's one other place that has the text drop down, and that's just going to be right here in the main area of those presets. So this is actually just an effect, not a preset. So if I drop that down, we see that we have these two effects right there, the numbers and time code. And you can tell the difference between a preset and an effect by an effect is going to drop this back down. An effect is going to look like this, where it has almost this little kind of Lego folder looking icon next to it. And then a preset is going to have the effects icon next to it, which could be a little bit confusing. It's still an effect, but it's preset in that it has keyframes that come with it. These do not have keyframes. We're going to have to create our own keyframes. So that's the difference there. And this effect, I'm going to have to apply to some sort of a layer. I could have applied it to a text layer, but it doesn't have to be. It really can be any kind of a layer that you want. So usually with effects like that, I just apply them to a solid. So we'll come up here and go Layer, New, and you want to make sure again that you have your main composition selected. So Layer, New, Solid. And just go ahead and say okay. It doesn't matter what color it is at this point. And we'll just grab that numbers effect and drop it onto our solid. And it's going to ask us a question before we even get started here. And that is, what font do we want to use? What style of font do we want that to be in? So do we want it italic, bold? And then do we want the text to be written horizontally or vertically? And just for the record, I would hardly ever choose vertical text because that's hard to read. So go ahead and try to stick to horizontal, except for maybe a really unusual case. And then you can choose your alignment. So I'm going to choose a left alignment for this bit of text. And I want to also use that font that we used earlier, so the PFDIN font, and regular style is great. So go ahead and say okay to that. And we see that we got this little tiny piece of text right there in the middle of our composition. And it's defaulting to this red color, which is okay for now. But I think I'm going to want to choose a white color. But because I don't have this in place yet, I'll just leave this red because it's going to be easier for me to read if it's ever just sitting on that background, because this background is so close to white. Okay, so there's definitely a few things that we're going to come in here and tweak. The first thing I want to change is the size, because this text is so small. Now, if I change the actual scale of this layer, we see that it does change, but it gets all blurry. So that's not what I want. I want the size of it to be as if I was just working with a regular piece of text. So I have to change the size right there. So we'll go ahead and scale that up. And you see that now that's a perfectly crisp looking piece of text. And I also want to change the position a little bit. So I'm going to drag this over here so that that's kind of more in the middle of that circle, because that's what I'm going to be going for. I want it to look like this number is happening inside of this circle. And I also want to change the fact that this looks like a decimal point. So first, I want to go ahead and just type in a different number here. Let's say 10. And this does have a decimal still, and that's because we've got the decimal places for 3. So we'll just go ahead and turn that down to 0, and now we just have a 10 all by itself. And you may need to reposition that just to the middle. And this actually looks a little bit small now, so I'm going to scoot that over just a little bit to make that larger, and then we'll move it back to the middle. Now, I want to go ahead and set some keys. So this effect is going to allow me to count up from this number 10 or count down to any number that I choose. So what I want it to do is from about this point where that circle is going to begin counting on, that's where I want my count to start. So I'll go ahead and set a keyframe for the value of that number. Okay, so now we have that keyframe set, and then over time I want it to count up to the number 68, and you'll see why we chose 68 in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and just type that in now. So I'm going to zoom forward here, or scrub forward to just about 6 seconds, and then we can change that if the timing looks strange later. So then we'll go ahead and type in 68 right there. And now if I scrub that, you can see that number is changing. So that's doing a count up. And now that my text is large enough, I'm going to go ahead and change that fill color to white, just because the blue on top of the red is a little bit hard to read, and I think white is just going to look better. So go ahead and say okay to that. And in fact, you could even change this to this really light color you see in our background here, so it almost looks like you can see through that. Maybe make it just a little bit lighter. So I color picked that, and then I'm just going to move up a little bit closer to that white, so it's not quite so dark, but it's pretty close to that. So just make it a little bit more interesting than using a stark white for whenever you're working with a color scheme like this one. And remember, as we continue to animate the rest of our options here and properties and images, we can change these keys at any time to change the timing up. So right now, one other thing I want you to pay attention to is that the proportional spacing box is checked. And basically what that's saying is that the alignment isn't changing every time that the number changes. So if I uncheck that, you can see that it just gets a little weird. So there's going to be times that you want this to be happening, but it just really depends on what kind of a font you're using and what you're going for. So maybe play with having that checked on and off in the future if you use this effect on your own. Now, one other thing that I want to talk about, since we're talking about more advanced effects here, is that the effects and presets are where any kind of third-party plugins will live that you install. So maybe if you buy the Trapcode suite, or maybe that Plexus plugin that everybody loves, you'll be able to see it here in your effects and presets. So you can see that I might have a few more effects installed than you do. So I have Trapcode here and Null Light Factory. So just keep that in mind. If you install something and you're looking around for it, that's where it's going to be. So in this lesson, we learned how to use a more advanced effect and how to use the effects controls panel to tweak the properties of that effect.